Problem number 4. Elizabeth. There's always a lighthouse, there's always a man, there's always a city. Like in ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. They invented the lighthouse, the wheel, and beer, so I guess men in cities throughout the regions were always involved. Now, if she's referring to the lighthouse that sends people to Columbia, then no, there isn't always one because we know Columbia doesn't always get built in every universe. This is another failing on the concept of the multiverse. It's more poetry and style over substance. For example, in the Star Trek novel Q Squared, written by Peter David, Trelane, who David made into a Q, reveals to Jack Crusher that out of all the other universes in the multiverse, there is only one Jack Crusher. That goes against the concept of the multiverse, but it's openly explained by a godlike character. It's a bad thing to state, a false theory in a story, but because it's from a god who's from a species of gods, we sigh and grudgingly accept it. In Bioshock Infinite, Elizabeth is not a god. At that point in the story, she's like one, but we don't know the extent of her powers, her control, or perception and understanding of them. Now, maybe she's just saying something complicated in a simple way, without literally implying every universe throughout infinity has those three constants. But absolutist statements from a character whose understanding of her power is limited, who's talking about the scope of infinite possible realities, doesn't quite fit it. Since the narrative has explained that Columbia doesn't exist in the multiverse, in some cases, she could say something like, wherever there's a Comstock, there's always a lighthouse. Again, we need to limit the extent of Elizabeth's power, or at least clean up her grammar, or it's completely unbelievable, considering our basic understanding of the multiverse concept. She cannot just make general statements like that. Now, if she really was a god, with godlike understanding, let's just say the ending would have been drastically different. Why isn't Elizabeth the main character? She's the most emotionally involved, gets her own arc where she decides to kill Fitzroy. She even denotes this in a visual change. Again, this is all good stuff. She can ride the skyline, can pick locked doors, point out and find all sorts of items for Booker, is the only one who can open tears without being a nonsense-spouting snob, so why do we have Booker? Just to give her someone to talk to? Is Booker just around to empower her? Feels more like Elizabeth is escorting Booker around. No one tries to stop her, despite her importance, and she never even gets hurt, aside from some wear and tear on her clothing. In fact, the only reason we need Booker is, it's a first-person shooter game. This story and its themes would have worked a lot better as an adventure title. Who raised her? She seems rather mature and well-adjusted, considering we don't know of any specific teacher, nanny, or parental figure. She never associated with the scientists, and they weren't even allowed to talk to her. All she ever identified with was a giant mechanical bird who was her brutish jailer in some sort of Stockholm syndrome. If that's her parental figure, she'd be a neurotic recluse, a brilliant one, but not one as refined, well-adjusted, and as Disney as this.
You must think me some sort of freak. A girl who can bring dead men back to life. Whose only acquaintance is a giant bird creature. It must seem ridiculous.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad the narrative actually made reference to that. Now, if a writer wanted to create a Belle-like character and go into detail from their birth, they have to show and tell us how she became a mature, happy, smiling, dancing, Paris-loving young woman, despite showing us the horrors of the rest of her life, and the lack of a social life. This is basic child psychology. We're missing part of the story here. Elizabeth's past and present don't quite add up. You might figure that her friends were books, and that's how she was raised, and I can sort of buy that.
You know how I said I had plenty of time to read? Well, I tried to figure it out. I read literature on physics and other such things.
Yeah? And what did that teach you?
That there's a world of difference between what we see and what is.
But without further exposition, locking a child up in a library till adulthood doesn't equate her to become a mature, kind, and happy kind of person. Maybe an opinionated, socially deviant, overly talkative, introverted recluse, though. She does exhibit some childlike behavior despite being an adult woman, but that's hardly telling. When Elizabeth goes to alternate realities, where'd the other Elizabeths go to? Did we just forget about these new Comstocks? Don't they have the same goal of getting an heir to drown in flame the mountains of man with his brainwashed lamb? Are these new Comstocks not interested in having an heir? Or did they already go through the whole Booker-daughter plot scenario? I guess it's just assumed all Comstocks have stolen an Elizabeth from an alternate reality, then have her taken away by an alternate Booker, And then he expects them to escape to an alternate Columbia, and every Comstock just waits because he knows he'll eventually get another alternate reality Elizabeth popping in eventually. So when Elizabeth gets angry at Booker for discovering he was going to go to New York, she escapes and Booker chases her. We see her opening up and running through tears on a brick wall. So is this now the same Elizabeth or another one? Because she makes doorways into alternate realities and she just walked through one. If Elizabeth can open tears rather quickly and run through them, this goes back to what we said before, but it's still a big deal. Why didn't Elizabeth open up tears when she was imprisoned? So she could always open a tear in a wall and always walk through the wall? And if you think she couldn't because she was in her tower that was siphoning her power, that's nonsense since we saw her open a tear across time and space to Paris. It was just too dangerous to go through. And if you think that the siphon was limiting her powers, that's wrong. The siphon was only installed after she hit puberty. She had plenty of time during her childhood to open a tear and escape. The diagram for the siphon is actually wrong. The decrease in power should occur as a result of the siphon like it was installed over here. Since this is a measurement over time, the siphon being installed at the lowest part doesn't quite make sense. Some other factor must have been involved then for the decrease in Elizabeth's power till the siphon was installed. Additionally, her current self shows that her abilities are at some dangerously powerful level, meaning she's never been this strong before and yet has never chosen to escape. Now, if you were a little girl, let's say 6 or 7, and you like to play make-believe because that's what all kids do, and you had the magical power to open up gateways to almost whatever, whenever, and wherever your imagination came up with, why wouldn't you go to those other more pleasant, interesting places? I know if I had a supernatural power as a kid, I'd be using them like crazy. What, did Elizabeth just open up a tear, then feel bad her giant bird jailer might get angry? Wouldn't an imprisoned, lonely, gifted, imaginative little girl who can naturally create magical doors use them?
When I was younger, I didn't just open the ones I found. I remember making them.
Making them?
I could go wherever I wanted. But I always wanted to come back.
To what?
I don't know. My family?
And that was Elizabeth's one saving grace. She wanted a family to come back to. She was scared of going through for those 18, 20 years. And that's all the narrative really had to do to explain why she didn't escape. But then this happens.
It must seem ridiculous.
You just got dealt a bad hand.
I am not going back to that tower no matter what happens.
Why are you so keen on lockpicking and code breaking?
If you put a person in a cage, they develop an interest in such things.
I suppose so.
And I won't be locked up again. Promise me that if it comes to it, you will not let him take me back.
Back there at the shop, what you asked me to do.
Let's not discuss it.
No, what did that thing do to you?
If he were to take me back, that's death, Mr. DeWitt. Or something so like it I cannot tell the difference.
Congratulations, Bioshock Infinite. You created a prisoner who wanted to escape her imprisonment, who can naturally create magical doorways to any place her heart desires, but you were too stupid or lazy to properly explain or subvert this ability or freedom to go through these doorways, even though you had the magical device that did that, and you didn't know how to show or tell us how. This makes Elizabeth the most contradictory and poorly crafted damsel in distress ever in storytelling. Seriously, you imprisoned a person who can make doors out of thin air and failed to show and tell us how she didn't escape. Since the plot is gone rather early, the story must focus on character. After Elizabeth gets her arc, the story pretty much focuses on her because, well, let's be honest, what else could it do?
So the moment of truth between us. New York or Paris?
Every character's plot is gone or nonsensical, as is any shred of understanding the setting or its physics. If Rational Games screwed up Elizabeth, it's game over Bioshock Infinite. Unfortunately, the antagonist, Comstock, is nothing more than Super Hitler complete with Zeppelins, so his motives are kind of crazy. All he wanted was Elizabeth to become him, and to him her powers aren't even relevant. They're just an annoyance. He just wants her for her genetics because he's shooting blanks. That's all Comstock was really good for, creating this conflict of wanting his own legacy and unwittingly giving her portal powers, which was really Booker's result of trying to get her back. Comstock could have appointed or raised anyone to be his heir. It would have made no difference. So, because Bioshock Infinite focused on telling a dramatic tale about this young woman, they somehow forgot to have it make some sense. It has no plot, and every other character is dumb or crazy. And I really don't think the developers wanted everyone to be either stupid or a murdering Looney Tune. But at least they have a nice voice and they're pretty to look at. And thank goodness she has some substance. Talking about Comstock, how does Elizabeth become Comstock's heir? Sure, you can say the brainwashing turned her into a dictator, but again, she can open doors to anywhere. How did her brainwashers constantly prevent that? When we catch up with her, we see a machine she's in, and this collar that stops her from using her powers, but eventually they'd have to take her out of that, and boom, she can just clap her hands and she's gone. Last I checked, brainwashing isn't 100%, and you cannot force someone to do something they don't want to. When talking to future evil Elizabeth, she said time caused her to be evil.
It wasn't the torture that broke me. It wasn't the indoctrination. It was time. Time rots everything, Booker. Even hope.
I thought time heals all wounds. Well, not for her. But if time rots all things, wouldn't she no longer care about Booker, who is a far, far distant memory, as is implied by her audio recordings? Yet she decided to bring Booker here and return him to the past. Why? For some reason, her followers just stopped listening to her. Were those the founders? Are they the ones who brainwashed her? Or are they the real power behind Columbia? So what kind of plan is this? They brainwash the Lamb to do their bidding, but no one sees or follows her like they followed Comstock, and they end up blowing up the world anyway. So Elizabeth bombs New York, which is the destruction of America or Sodom or the world or whatever, which happens in 1984, which is 72 years after she's captured and brainwashed. This makes her 92 years old. Why is there such a long timetable? Columbia didn't take that long to be built. Even with tears, it's a scientific, environmental, and logistical wonder of the world. Nothing comes close to it. Have they been bombing the planet for decades? As for war technology, you don't want to give your evil, impure surface dwellers time to develop better weapons than you, especially when they've got a few dozen years to wage war against each other and get really, really good at it. And, the 1980s, America was really, really good at blowing stuff up. And how is a diminutive elderly woman, kind of weak here, able to pick up Booker? I thought using all that tear powers physically messes you up. Anyway, back to war. Why is Columbia attacking New York with blimps? And why wouldn't the Americans counterattack and win with, supersonic fighter jets or artillery? What happened to World War I and II? And all the other wars America had? So America, the superpower of the world, can't stop an army of blimps. Maybe if Columbia could control the weather and attack from a storm, I guess a surprise? See, America has this wonderful weapon. I'll pick one. It's the SR-71. It's a supersonic jet developed in the 1960s, which has never been shot down. It'll be the last thing anything never sees, because it travels at Mach 3, which is about up in 80,000 feet in the sky, which is 3 times the altitude above Columbia. And that's just one type of plane the Americans have had over the years, and let alone other various weapons that blow the crap out of things. If Bioshock Infinite is trying to tell a story of American history, or an alternate telling of it, and they've done so at the turn of the century, and then they come to the 1980s, well, they better explain or show how blimps stopped the American war machines of the past 50 years. Blimps.
Hello? Airplanes? Yeah, it's blimps. You win. Bye.
If Elizabeth was so smart, why couldn't she fake her captor's brainwashing? She's reading books on quantum mechanics and must have read a whole bunch of others. She's singing, dancing, painting, lock-picking, cracking codes, but she can't give what her captors want? Why couldn't she just put on a facade and fake it? I don't exactly know how brainwashing or torture works on some people, but I imagine they'd have to steal their resolves and play along and give their captors what they wanted. There has to be some explanation how effective this mind control was and how her powers were controlled for 72 years or so. And more importantly, to show or explain to us how she suddenly came to her senses for this scenario to make any sense. I could buy it if she was faking it and just ended up giving into the masquerade she invented, but that's a hell of a lot of time to wake up and fix the past. And what the hell were the Lutesses doing? I thought they wanted to help Elizabeth. How did Elizabeth get her powers from her baby finger? Now, this is just speculation from Rosalind on how Elizabeth got her powers. It's really not important, but it does make you think how a scientist lacks this kind of perspective on things, considering she never shuts about Schrodinger cat analogies. If Elizabeth got her powers because a piece of her body was left behind in another reality, then anyone who traversed the multiverse would get these powers. For example, let's look at Booker. Well, he oxidizes, so just standing there, the air and sunlight start removing molecules from his skin. And when he breathes, he starts respiring. When he relieves himself, there's little compounds like bilirubin and thiochrome that get released as waste. He bleeds, he spits, he perspires, he shaves, he washes, he gets a haircut. I mean, there could have been a more creative and unique reason as to why Elizabeth got these abilities, like she touched a Lutece field and that lopped off her finger, as opposed to matter from one universe being in another. Maybe it was because it was bone marrow and Elizabeth was a baby. Again, not really important, nor is it a huge deal, but it does make you think, and you suddenly realize Rosalind isn't as good a quantum physicist as you might think. The next problem, well, this one is pretty big. I'm guessing the average player missed this. In the original universe we were in when we save Elizabeth, we see her tower getting destroyed. In her tower was the Siphon, and it gets destroyed. Later in the alternate reality we enter in the story, the tower with the Siphon is intact. But near the end of the story, once it gets destroyed, Elizabeth now has full control of her power. This implies the Siphon from an alternate reality was suppressing her powers. So why didn't the destruction of the original Monument Island release Elizabeth's full power? Here we see the original, and here's the alternate reality one. We had no knowledge of an alternate reality in that universe, so how or why would a Siphon be constructed on Monument Island? Did this Comstock, which I think happens to be the third or fourth dimension we go to, somehow predict this specific Elizabeth would arise? What kind of technology did the Lutesses give him to predict this kind of scenario? So when the power is destroyed in the universe she was living in, the one that actually suppressed her power wasn't restored. But the last reality we travel to, the tower that does get destroyed, for some reason that one counts. I'm sorry, this hole is big enough to fly an infinite number of giant mechanical birds through. Then there's a somewhat big, obvious one at the end, but this has more to do with Elizabeth's character than her power. She's suicidal simply because Booker wants to kill Comstock. She commits suicide by killing Booker at the end because Booker wants to stop Comstock. In every reality, I think, and this is done by Elizabeth bringing Booker to some magical land of alternate reality, dreams, escapedness. If she really did enter alternate realities, they'd be alternate realities, not some weird magical place where people just disappear when Booker gets angry at them. So Booker wants to stop Comstock by killing him, but Elizabeth doesn't bother to explain alternate methods. Now that she's a demigod or whatever, she just goes along with it, as do all these other Elizabeths who somehow make it to this alternate reality. I'm guessing this doesn't include those who have good lives or who come from good Columbias and good Comstocks or whatever. This is not just Elizabeth creating a grandfather paradox, it's a multi-dimensional suicide murder pact and the deaths of an infinite number of Elizabeths. At least that's what I think the narrative is trying to tell us. Now, let's back up a bit. Booker has stopped Comstock. Okay. Elizabeth says there are millions more. Okay, that sucks. Why do we care? Why does Booker have to save the entire multiverse of every Comstock ever? Is this some fatherly duty? Who's the main character here? Because Booker gets any more headaches, he's going to die of blood loss. So, Elizabeth goes to a point in time, which is the baptism, where Booker may be reborn as Comstock. Now, even though it's not explicitly stated, this magical place must act as a sort of nexus, where all other alternate universes must intersect and diverge into. Now, however that is possible, if it's true, then Booker doesn't have to kill himself. He can simply choose, by his freedom of choice, to be Booker DeWitt, because he's overwriting all the other universes just by amalgamating them all together. He's already Booker DeWitt. Despite his memories being changed so many times, and even after killing Comstock and getting his memories, That's who he is, as messed up and confused as his mind now is. To him, the journey is over. He's gone through the baptism before. He may have random, bizarre thoughts of extreme racism, but he won't suddenly want to build a city in the sky. The headaches and nosebleeds slow him down, and his perspective has certainly changed, making him a different person, but not an ambitious, murdering religious nut. Definitely a murderer, en masse, no doubt, but not the likes of Comstock. He killed Comstock, he got his nosebleeds, and that's that. Even if he goes through with the baptism again. After Booker rejects it, and the Nexus unfolds, and all the other alternatives, realities go off in their multiple directions, and, well, Booker will still emerge. But in order for this to work across the multiverse, whether Booker dies or simply doesn't go through with the baptism again, it's if and only if it is some magical point in space-time where that's even possible, where the multiverse is somehow focused and all threads are bound together. This still doesn't address or solve the problem of the multiverse, since it states that there must be some alternate reality of a Comstock being created outside of the baptism, but the narrative isn't sophisticated enough to address this possibility. In fact, we don't have a word from God telling us this. It's still a possibility and still up in the air. Now, everyone's been speculating on the epilogue. You can interpret it any way you like. However, based on the facts of what happened before and after, there are only two possibilities. In the epilogue, we see Booker alive and about to talk to Anna. Possibility number one. This is an alternate reality Booker. This is not our Booker we've known because he's dead. So that magical holodeck moment with our Elizabeth wasn't a Nexus, and not all the Bookers throughout the multiverse died. Thus, this must be an alternate reality Booker. Elizabeth wasn't the god we thought she was, nor had the control of her powers we thought she did, and all we did was kill at least 8 other Elizabeths from alternate realities. However, the millions and millions of Comstocks are still there. Or number 2, it's a flashback. The Nexus could have been real and everyone dies. Or it wasn't, and the rest of the multiverse is unaffected. So, this makes Bioshock Infinite a story of a useless hero who unwittingly travels to alternate dimensions, amalgamating himself from alternate versions of himself, discovering that other alternate versions of himself are the bad guys, then defeats one of the bad guys, then accidentally commits assisted suicide because his magical alternate reality daughter, whom there are 8 of, thought that after seeing millions of bad guys meant they could stop them all by committing limited dimensional temporal patricide. Only our hero and at least his 8 alternate reality daughters and Comstocks die. Or Bioshock Infinite was a story of a useless hero, yada yada yada, who commits infinite dimensional temporal patricide, preventing the multiverse from creating various bad guys of him. All infinite versions of our hero and his daughters die. And if all other versions of Elizabeth did die, and she really was a god that created a Nexus, one must simply ask, if Elizabeth was a god, why would she want to kill herself, and why and how would all versions of herself agree to this? You'd think gods would have some control over how to fix problems they have power over, especially when the chosen solution involves their destruction. Then there's the whole multiverse problem of there not being any other Elizabeths who didn't want to die. Elizabeth, within the frame of the multiverse that Bioshock Infinite has been showing us, doesn't add up. This all comes down to a very famous philosophical discussion of free will versus determinism. The narrative somewhat touches this, and in that scenario it does a decent job. It's not completely off, it just doesn't do it to address the other issues that keep popping up. I'm going to leave that for a later, bigger explanation that tries to look at the problem directly, but essentially the narrative did not show us how Booker's freedom of will was not subverted by his newly acquired memories or by the physical world dictating that causation is predetermined. And now for the most out-of-place scene in the entire story. Granted, we are in a magically contrived and more delicious dreamland now. Nothing makes sense anyway, and if you can explain it, please share the secret. The only question I have is, what additional drugs do I need to understand this scene?
What is that?
It's a key.
Where did it come from?
It's always been there. I just couldn't see it.